Now that we're in 2021, Apple's M1 Macs have proven to be incredibly powerful for the price. But what happens when we put the absolute least expensive MacBook, the $999 base M1 MacBook Air, up against the absolute most expensive MacBook, the $3,899 16-inch MacBook Pro with the 8-core i9 2.4 gig processor and the insane 5600M graphics chip, which by the way, was a major improvement over the previous graphics options. Now this comparison is just a bit insane because the 16-inch is basically 4 times more expensive, it's a much larger machine in general, and it has 2 cooling fans, while the MacBook Air has 0. But what if the Air could actually compete in some areas? If it can, it'll prove just how good Apple Silicon really is, and it'll give us a sneak peek at the potential performance of the upcoming 14 and 16-inch M1X MacBook Pros, which are expected to boost the market share of Apple Silicon Macs all the way up to 7%. So let's get right into the performance testing with Geekbench 5. In terms of single-core CPU performance, the M1 Air is way ahead because it uses only 4 very powerful and efficient performance cores. And making it even more surprising, the M1 Air actually outperforms the 16-inch in terms of multi-core performance as well. Now, if we go over to real-world performance using the 10-minute Cinebench R23 stress test, the 16-inch now takes over by a huge 38% because the Air has no fans at all, so it starts to throttle down the performance. So in terms of CPU power, the Air is better for short bursts of performance, while the 16-inch is better for longer and heavier workloads, which we'll get into in just a second. But now I want to move on to graphics performance, and this is where the 16-inch Pro's 5600M GPU really shines, being over twice as fast as the base 7-core GPU on the M1 Air in terms of Geekbench 5 metal performance. This is going to impact everything from gaming to video editing performance, but we've actually estimated that the future M1X 16-inch Pro with the integrated 16-core GPU is gonna beat the current dedicated 5600M graphics, so that's very exciting. Now moving on to gaming performance, we tested GFX Bench 5.0 using the Aztec Ruins off-screen test. And here, there isn't as big of a difference, but the 16-inch is still 95% more powerful than the Air, which is a big deal for gaming. We also tested games like League of Legends, where the M1 Air was able to maintain an average of 82 frames per second, but it's still nothing compared to the 16-inch. And then in Fortnite, the Air had less than 60 FPS average, so it couldn't keep up with the 16-inch Pro, which got very good frame rates. Now on top of that, you have to use workarounds like crossover and parallel 16 to run Windows games on the M1, and a lot of them won't even run, while the 16-inch can easily use Boot Camp, which performs much better and more reliably, so it's very clear which one is better for gaming. Now since the M1X 16-inch is expected to have more graphics power than the 5600M, we should actually get very great AAA gaming results later this year, and hopefully a lot of the bugs in crossover and other apps will be fixed by then. I personally think that a lot of people will eventually start to prefer Macs over Windows laptops for gaming, so it's going to be very interesting to see what's going to happen over the next couple of years. Moving on, let's focus on a variety of common tasks for Mac users, like photo editing, Xcode programming, and Logic Pro music production, so let's start with the latter. We tested the new Logic Pro benchmark, which measures how many tracks the machine can run without overloading the CPU, and surprisingly, the MacBook Air was right behind the 16-inch Pro, which nobody was expecting because of the huge difference in raw multi-core performance. So for people who are producing music, the new M1 Air is actually a killer value, and the upcoming M1X Macs are going to be just insane. Now moving on to Xcode programming, this is where I was absolutely blown away. The M1 MacBook Air destroyed the 16-inch Pro, being a massive 80% faster, which doesn't make any sense if you look at the previous results. And it even did it without a fan, while the 16-inch was loud and very hot. I personally think that this is because of the more efficient and optimized ARM-based architecture, including the unified memory, even though it only has 8 gigs of RAM compared to 32 gigs on the 16-inch, so the future is looking very bright for programmers. Now let's get into photo editing with Lightroom Classic, which by the way hasn't been updated for Apple Silicon just yet, so it's using Rosetta to run. We exported 50 raw 42 megapixel photos, and the Air is performing surprisingly well, being only 38 seconds slower than the 16-inch Pro, even though it has 4 times less RAM. However, when we bump up this test to 500 raw photos instead of just 50, the MacBook Air begins to suffer from thermal throttling because of the lack of a fan, and the difference becomes much bigger, with the 16-inch being around 8 minutes faster. But in terms of editing smoothness, the M1 is still very quick and snappy because of the ARM chip, so it really only makes a difference when exporting photos. So if you work with very large projects, the 16-inch is still the way to go. Now let's finally get into video editing with Final Cut Pro, starting with the Bruce X benchmark, which fully relies on graphics power, and the 16-inch Pro was 3 times faster, which is extremely impressive. Then moving on to exporting a 5-minute 4K H.264 clip, which is the most common format that most YouTubers use, the 16-inch was only 3 seconds faster than the Air, and that's because this test is mostly limited by the hardware encoders, and the ones on the M1 are faster. Next up, we have a couple of stabilization tests, starting with stabilizing a 1-minute HEVC clip, and surprisingly, they both finished in just 10 seconds, once again limited by the encoders. But now, when stabilizing C200 Canon RAW footage, the 16-inch is quite a bit ahead because there are no encoders for this type of footage, so it depends on a mixture of CPU and GPU performance. Moving on, I decided to test some very heavy footage, exporting a 5-minute 8K Red RAW clip. And here, the difference is massive, with the 16-inch being over 3 times as fast because of the extra graphics performance and the fact that it actually has fans. So if you're doing any kind of heavy video editing, the 16-inch is currently the better option for sure. Now I want to finish off with one test which was heavily requested, transcoding and exporting the new Canon R5 10-bit 422 footage. Surprisingly, the MacBook Air absolutely destroyed the 16-inch in terms of the 5-minute export test. And that's because the M1 Macs are currently the only computers in the world that have hardware encoders and decoders for this new codec. Now, if you choose to transcode this footage instead, the massive difference remains, with the M1 Air only taking 13 minutes to transcode a 30-minute clip compared to 40 minutes for the 16-inch MacBook Pro, which is just insane. So with all of that testing out of the way, I want to remind you guys that this is the absolute weakest Apple Silicon MacBook that will ever be made compared to the absolute most powerful Intel MacBook ever made. You can quite literally buy 4 of these MacBook Airs for the same price of this 16-inch Pro. And amazingly, when it comes to real-world performance, the Air isn't as far off as you'd expect it to be, and there's absolutely no fan noise at all. And in some of these tests, like Xcode programming and Canon R5 video editing, the Air was actually faster. And one thing to keep in mind is that the M1 chip uses much less power. Only 13 watts for the CPU compared to 60 on the 16-inch, and 5.6 watts for the graphics compared to 50 watts for the 5600M GPU. So if you get anything out of this comparison video, you should be extremely excited for the 16-inch M1X MacBook Pro that's coming later this year, because that MacBook is gonna be insane, likely with 4 extra high-performance cores and 8 extra GPU cores. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, go ahead and tap the like button below and click the circle above to subscribe. Definitely check out one of those 2 videos right over there, and we will see you in the next one.